Hi, welcome back to my channel. I just felt like doing a quick video. Just on the quick. I literally just feel like it is one of those things where I feel like recently I'm just sort of like, when you find your peace in life and you know what gives you peace, and I feel like as an ADHDer, to finally have your frontal lobe start to make its way onto being able to, develop itself, I feel like there's such a place of peace that you can tap into. And when you know what, as I say, brings you your peace, there's so much stuff that you can sort of disregard, bless you, as irrelevant to your experience. And it's really not necessary to engage with or worry about or deal with, because there is definitely a sense in life to think that what you worry about, what goes on in your own mind, is what you will involve. Like, you can choose what you have control of. You can choose to worry about what you have control of, and or deal with what you have control of, and sort of release the rest. And I think it's one of those things where you only have so much control over life in general. And I think that definitely comes in relationships and people that you interact with, people in general, people in casual, basically shop, customer level relationships, even people that's just in a bad mood in general life or whatever, people that are negative. Because what I'm starting to really see is like, I would consider myself quite a positive person. I would consider myself quite a transcended and developed person in a lot of ways. But I think there's a lot of people that have quite a limited capacity to actually be on that or be on any level that resolves that kind of being in a lot of ways. And I think it doesn't really change with age, is what I'm saying. There's like a lot of people that are not going to be able to show up authentic, or I wouldn't say show up authentically, show up with grace in a situation, and are not able to to show up with honesty in a situation. And you have to just make peace with that. I think as someone, if you're like overly, well, I don't say overly authentic, because I think there's a level where we bring in neurodiversity in people. Some people just don't appreciate literal behaviour. But I think besides that being a concept, the fact is some people genuinely don't have the capacity to bring humanity to many situations, and they will go so far out their way to create discord. And that is just something that you have to make peace with. And I think, for me, observing as I get older, the balance that people that is within life, and the inevitable truths of different people's kind of personality traits on balance, and how, like, you're really just not going to get a lot from some people. You're really not going to do much if you're trying to achieve something with some people, because there's just no capacity for it. It saves you a lot of stress and mental spiraling and wishing and worrying over things. And I think sometimes it's traumatized in a child sense, actually, a lot of the time, to expect and hope people to show up, actually, and sort of like take that healthy parent role, if you will. Or especially if you've been parentified, I think it's quite normal to have this feeling of, I really want someone to show up as a human in interactions, and it's quite a big fuck you to people that has messed you around in the past, and a massive hell yeah to your transcended inner child, when you can be like, I can do that for myself, and I don't need other people's kind of back up, and realistically not only not having other people to show up in that way, it just gets to a point of, regardless if you're inner child, just adulting in general, to set a healthy expectation of what some people are able to achieve is going to be essential to lifing in general, because again, it comes from this level, I find, of ego versus reality in a lot of people. And I think there's a lot of people that talk the talk in a big way, but they can't walk the walk. Do you know what I mean? They will promise a lot of things, they will, you know, say that they're capable of a lot of things, and really not show up to any or much of it. And you know, we all know how to clout, but realistically there's always going to be those people. And you know, as much as I like to hope that sometimes, because I think as you get older, especially when you're a young adult, you can sort of put a blindfold on to people's inevitable limitations to one degree or another, because you can say, oh yeah, like everyone's in that phase where like they're excited about life is lifing, and everyone's, you know, has to get along and this, that and the other in certain perspectives. And sometimes that is the case, especially in adult life. I think on a level everyone can coexist, but I do think that like it gets to a point sometimes that, you know, you're just not going to find honest reciprocity with some people. You know, some people are quite good at not showing up as their authentic self in a way that's beneficial to a workplace, and it means that they don't get socially excluded quite as often, because they can show up with this false niceness that people kind of validate, and it means that they don't become such a problem. But I think when you've got people that, you know, are not going to be authentic, it's like to move with safety for yourself in situations, because, or like not even just that, moving in, you know, awareness. I saw this thing by Dr. Ramani today, who does a lot of videos on narcissism, about awareness in relationships rather than radical acceptance always, because it's really hard to accept when people are inevitably demonstrating these overtly toxic behaviors that are really, really hard to manage. But awareness is another option sometimes, just to be like, when something is a pattern and it's been repeated, to expect it as a pattern and not to, well, as I say, everyone has boundaries within relationships and dynamics, but I think to not drive yourself mad trying to change someone that's inevitably not going to, nor are they willing to change. It's healthier for the individual to have awareness that people have limitations, that, like, you know, because as well it's sometimes just comes down simply as, regardless of narcissism, a lot of people have autistic traits that are just so prevalent to some of us but are completely unprevalent to the individual. And as I say, this whilst you're masking, it's quite easy to show up and be very receptive to other people's needs, to one degree or another, be hyper aware of what's socially acceptable. But on the other end of the spectrum, you've got this very, very, you know, Machiavellian, unattuned person that's not going to be able to show up, that's not going to turn up with, you know, health. And I think there's a lot of people, you know, as much as people can show up with a sense of, you know, I'm the best, the strongest, the most this, that and the other, and chat all the chat that they want, inevitably there's always going to be people that are going to show up as their authentic self and move consecutively to these fluffers, if you will. And I think they're like the ones that you need to just allow nature to take its course, because you'll find that with a lot of these people, they will be left behind, and there will be a sense that they're not going to stay the course to where other people will move on and not be stuck in anger and not be stuck in resentment towards the fact that they're not being socially accepted unless they show up with a false self. You have to continue to allow the process of life to continue moving swiftly forward in the way that it naturally will, and not be held back in this mindset of people that's toxic, trying to drag you down and hold you back, I would say, is the best way I can put it. You know, it's not functional for anyone, and it's essential mentally for humaning, I would argue, with people. That's gonna, with the general interactions that come with life, that everyone has limitations, and if you are not going to acknowledge a person's limitation, you are simply going to put yourself at a detriment, because you will either expect too much of them, or you will expect too much of yourself trying to change them. But the healthy middle, I suppose, is to accept the limitations and accept what is, and move with congruence to that. And I think it can evoke grief within someone if you are not used to doing this type of work, especially when A, you've got a wounded inner child, B, society tells you that everyone should be on the same level and that everyone should show up with humanity. This was a terrible realization for me in childhood when I hit puberty, and I realized that like half the population are pure evil or they can be pure evil, and when I say pure evil, I mean personality disordered. That was good fun. But yeah, it's like it doesn't really improve into adulthood, I would argue, and there's a lot of limitations that a lot of people fall into. And as I say, it is really just getting to the place of like not internalizing the ego state, being accepting that in a way that when people show up with this false self, it does help rapport, it does help them to be more tolerable, which is a good thing. You don't want to be dealing with their damaged self all the time and their disordered self, but you need to also be like, this isn't the actual factual truth of the situation, this is an ego representation of a disordered person that has limitations in what they can and cannot achieve socially and within life in general. And there'll be a lot of hold back to this, inevitably. Because as well, people will attack what they are intimidated by. And from what I've seen of interacting socially with people, especially as you get older, if you don't interact and you don't acknowledge a person, they will not. I mean, I have had a stalker before, so it's not always the case, just to say, but that's not the norm. Most of the time, when you've not got a stalker, if you don't interact with a person, they will not continue to attack you, because you will not be as prevalent in their reality, and you can be doing nothing wrong, you can be absolutely humaning as is socially accepted. But if you come across a toxic person, or a person that's got a paranoia complex to do with their personality disorder, they will attack you inevitably, because they are uncomfortable watching someone that is threatening to their sense of self and their ego, blah blah blah, as goes narcissism, but regardless of the level of disorder within a person, to limit that interaction as much as you can is inevitably helpful. And you should never limit your own capacity as a person for the sake of another person, because that is ridiculous. And I would say that should extend into you know, romantic relationships, friendships, this, that and the other, if you're limiting yourself, you should be in, you know, dynamics that you're aligned with people. And I think a lot of people can have, and I think otherwise you just find yourself going down the rabbit hole of people's Machiavellianism. Do you know what I mean? People can be misled, and that's one thing, but people can be misled, but when someone's a sociopath or they've got sociopathic tendencies, like, people can pretend to be misled, they can victimize themselves, they can create a whole fuck ton of lies that are really not grounded in the truth whatsoever, and there's really no point trying to unpick that when you've got, you know, the inevitable truth of someone not being worth your time. And when you can come to that realization, because I think I went for a period of like isolation when I started understanding other people and going through spiritual awakening level, and I felt that I was sort of, I wouldn't say isolated because I still had friends and, you know, everything, and stuff like that, but I think it took me a long period of grief to deal with this type of thing. We all sort of spiritual awaken in different ways, but yeah, when you can look at things from the level that it makes sense to the individual, I suppose. But I think especially as someone that, yeah, doesn't have a clinical personality disorder the same way that narcissists do, like, this is really common, I think, for a lot of people. But still being able to interact on that low level, when necessary, and absolutely necessary, I would argue, is functional for human beings, but to then still be able to, because you can do journaling, and you can figure out what you've internalized about these disordered people and expectations that you have of them and of yourself that aren't actually necessary to have, and they might be unfair to you, and they might be unfair to other people, and it can really just help release a lot of, you know, miscommunication. Because I think as well, you know, when you look at limitations, just quickly because my phone is literally about to run out, when it comes to limitations, what some people see as compassionate and what some people see as trying looks very different on different people. You know, what one person's trying is taking the request to not comment on your hair looking bad, if that makes sense, and what another person's trying could be is going so far out of their way that they spend hundreds and hundreds of pounds on some party for you, or do you know what I mean, some outfit for you or something like that. It looks very different to different people as to what the same emotion is and what the same amount of capacity is to doing something. And I do genuinely believe that when you have aligned relationships, they are valid regardless of what anyone else says. And I think sometimes it's easy to let the voices of other people's opinions filtrate into your experience, especially as a child, especially when you've not got that grounding, as I always refer back to, of self-esteem, self-respect, kind of validation necessary for a human being, and you haven't had your car built properly. But it's as an adult and a healthy adult to go back and look at these things and be like, naturally, is this, because they won't care realistically as well. When you look at people's limitations, they're not, the next person down the road is not going to give a fuck. If anything, anyone is always happier when you're interacting with a more evolved and more aware, more self-aware place, and someone that's more healed. You're always going to want to interact with a more healed version of someone's self. Even a toxic person, if a toxic person is healed and they can show up, you know, where necessary, happy fucking days, everyone's happy. I would love to interact with a healed person. What's difficult is when you're not healed and you're working from a place of ego compensation and a place of trying to make yourself what you're not, or hold yourself to standards that you're not, and this, that and the other. We all have our own relative struggle realistically, and it's not for me to sit here and judge, but I'm only talking from a place of healing. But yeah, I feel like that is my point that I wanted to make, and thank you for listening. Bye bye.